Hi everybody, Levi Clay here, back again for another music lesson, and today we're going to be answering a question that was posted in the comments on my last YouTube video, because of course I am reading all of those comments, every single one of them, and I'm happy to respond to all of your comments, and more specifically, if I think there's something in there that would make for a great video and would help lots of people, then I'll happily make a video for you, because that's who I am. So hit that subscribe button and we will continue to keep this train a-rolling. So Quick to Hear wrote in and said, what do I do to practice reading the time in written music? I'm horrible and afraid of failing. Can read chord charts, but I don't have the finesse. Add read eighths and 16th notes. Help, Levi. It's all right, mate. Don't worry. Your typing was as questionable there as my reading at the beginning was. The first thing that you have to say to something like that is, I guess there's two things. One is reading important for you? That's the first thing. There were some misunderstandings about that previous video. I wasn't saying that if you can't read, that's something that you should learn to do, because it's not a skill that's applicable to all musicians. It just simply isn't. You know, when I teach, when new people come in to learn music with me, reading actually isn't something that I tend to teach almost any of my students, because I am very much of the opinion that this is going to take us years of work, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, and the skill isn't going to be hugely useful for your music in the end, compared to using that same time and that same money learning a skill like training your ear. Much more important. I think your ears are more important than your eyes. But if you are in a situation where you have decided or worked out that reading is a skill that is useful for you as a musician, your ability to understand music that's written on a page, or needing the skill to be able to write music that's in your head down, or it could be arrangements for bands or whatever it happens to be. If it's going to be a skill that's applicable for you, fantastic. Let's get to work. And the other thing I want to say is you should never, ever, ever be afraid of failing. Never be afraid of failing. I hate these old sayings that they have, like, but of course they're true. The old, you miss 100% of the shots that you never take. And what's the difference between the student and the master? Well, the master has failed more times than the student's ever even attempted the task. You have to do the thing, and you can't be afraid of failing, because failing is you just getting better. Failing simply is you learning. You learn from your failures. So you have to work on these things. And it is worth your time. So the beautiful thing about what it is that you're asking here is that you're talking about something that can be practiced away from the instrument, which is wonderful. You know, these are the sorts of things that I used to practice quite a lot when I would be commuting to and from work or a university or whatever it happened to be. Back in my days when I lived in London, lots of commuting, lots of traveling everywhere, and I couldn't sit on a tube or a bus with my guitar, but I could work on skills like this. So it's a very, very simple process. And if you look up Levi Clay reading on YouTube, you're going to find me talking about this kind of idea, but it really is very important. And I do staunchly believe that it's the most effective way to do this. So I'm going to point at my t-shirt, right? I'm wearing a t-shirt. And what does this say? What does this say? You can see that it says Megadeth. I could put words on screen, but I'm wearing a t-shirt. Think of your name. When you see your name written on a page, you don't look at the letters, you see the word. This is how we process information when it comes to reading words. The same is true for rhythm. The same absolutely should be true for rhythm. If you are at that stage in your understanding of rhythm where you're trying to count each note, and you go, okay, this note lasts for this long, and okay, so that means this note will come in here, and then this note lasts for this long, and that means it will come in here. You failed before you've begun. Now don't get me wrong, when I started playing music, that was how I tried to process rhythm, because that's how we do it. I think that makes sense to us. It's actually the only way you can do it in the early stages. You have to do that until you reach the point where you can no longer process things fast enough. When I read your text at the beginning of this, I wasn't looking at each individual word. I was reading ahead. This is something that we do subconsciously, right? When we're reading, our eyes are actually ahead of where we are. We're processing what's coming and dealing with what's there because we've already processed it, because we saw it earlier when we were looking ahead. It's a fascinating thing, the way the brain works and the way that we read. The same thing is going to be true of music. So I want to present this idea to you. I want to present the idea that what you need to do is you need to start learning rhythms as words. You need to start processing what each individual rhythm looks like and what that thing sounds like. So I worked on this extensively, and I continue to work on this with my guys over on Patreon. Look at that for a plug. Link in the description, where I do the weekly guided practice routines. We put a lot of time into certain rhythm reading skills. We've taken it up to 16th notes, but you have to do it with quarter notes. You have to do it with eighth notes. You have to do it with half notes. The idea is very, very simple. So if I put this rhythm on screen, I'm sure you can process this rhythm. It's 4 quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to hate me for this, but you have to read that. And this is kind of the beauty of that idea of practice the things that you need, not the things that you want. This is, I would imagine, very easy for you to read. Awesome. Practice it for a second, It's no stress. And then once it's done, it's done. And you're going to have this programmed in. You'll never think about it again. So there's our 4 quarter notes. And this, of course, would be what 4 beats of eighth notes, or 8 eighth notes would look like. Now, you have to take both of these rhythms and you have to read them. It doesn't necessarily have to be on your instrument, but if you're doubling down, you could do that. But yeah, so we would look at those eighth notes and we would read them. And I can't stress this enough. I know that you've looked at that rhythm, just like you looked at my shirt. I don't need to have the band name there. And you could say Megadeth, 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 Megadeth over and over again. But that's not actually helping you. That's helping your mouth. What you need to do is you need to look at Megadeth, 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 Megadeth. If you read this, if you look at it and read it over and over and over again, your brain will start to understand that means, or that is said as, Megadeth. When we look at these eighth note rhythms, we have to read it religiously, stare at it, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and keep following, and 3 and 4, and eyes are always on the note you're reading, and 3 and 4 and 1. We can do that. I know we can do that, because these are simple rhythms. But then we start to get into the territory of mixing rhythms up. So if I have this rhythm, for example, this is a quarter note, 2 eighth notes, 2 eighth notes, and a quarter note. We should be able to read this because we spent a lot of time looking at individual rhythms. Now, I'm making this a little bit harder because it's a YouTube video. I wouldn't necessarily recommend learning full bar rhythms at first, but you can break each one of these down into half a bar. You could obviously see the first half of that bar would be an eighth note and a quarter note and 2 eighth notes. And we could look at that quarter note and 2 eighth notes and go 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 1, 2, and we can look at the second part, 2 eighth notes and a quarter note, 3 and 4, 3 and 4, 3 and 4. And then, of course, we should be able to read the whole thing. 1, 2, and 3 and 4. 1, 2, and 3 and 4. Not too tricky a rhythm. Now, of course, this gets more complicated when you start to make the rhythms more complicated. I tend to find with my students that these types of rhythms, the ones that are quarter notes and eighth notes, they don't tend to struggle with that one until I put this rhythm on screen. Now, this, of course, is an eighth note followed by quarter note followed by an eighth note. We have to learn. Now, this always trips students up. There's always this feeling of approximating it when they see it on a page, but there's no reason for us to approximate this. We should know what this sounds like. This is an eighth note followed by a quarter note followed by an eighth note. We're playing on the 1, 1. The quarter note comes in on the and of 1, 1 and. That carries through beat 2, and that second eighth note appears on the and of beat 2. So we would go 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and ba 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 ba. It's a simple rhythm to read, and I promise you, if you put that on a page, if you put it in Guitar Pro, whatever your working tool is, and you practice reading that for a good few minutes, when you come to look at that rhythm on the page, so it could be in a tab book or in the real book, or maybe you're writing music and you write a rhythm on your guitar that goes bum 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 bum. You'll have this sense of having internalized that sound, that word, if you like, and then you know how to write that word down. Eighth note, quarter note, eighth note. I know that rhythm. It's not a problem. And of course, when we add in the rest of those notes, the quarter note and the 2 eighth notes at the end, we would go 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and ba 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 ba. Now, I understand that at this stage, I'm not going to make this video too long or too complicated. We're only dealing in quarter notes and eighth notes. But that's good. It's very much like the idea behind that last video. Practice what you need, not what you want. You talk about 16th notes. Absolutely. You need that. but not yet, because you need to work on this first. You have to understand the simple rhythms. We have to be able to do dotted quarter notes, so a dotted quarter note and an eighth note. We have to be able to read ties, so the eighth note, quarter note, eighth note tied into an eighth note, quarter note, eighth note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and we have to be able to do that before we start making our life complicated with 16th notes. So if you want to delve deeper into this subject, aside from, of course, my Patreon, I would recommend the book Melodic Rhythms for Guitar. This is a William Levitt book. It's a Berkeley Press book. It essentially covers this method. You start dealing and learning to read rhythms, rhythmic motifs on a single note, and then once you've understood that rhythmic motif, you apply it to a melodic motif. And what you'll find when you transition from reading that rhythmic motif over and over and over again and then move on to that melodic motif, what's going to happen at that point is the brain won't worry about the rhythm, because you know it. You're processing it as you're reading it, and you can devote more of your attention to the actual notes, the actual pitch recognition, which I think is harder than rhythm recognition. Finding the notes on your instrument feels harder than rhythm, because rhythms feel infinitely more finite than pitch and location on the instrument. So that's a really, really good book for this. I'd also recommend checking out some of my Reading 101 videos on YouTube. The idea behind those is that I take a transcription, something that I've transcribed, and we learn to play it. But we don't learn to play it by listening to it. We don't learn to play it by pressing play in Guitar Pro. We learn to play it purely by reading it. We learn, and I'm not saying we sight read. I'm not saying I give it to you and go, right, read it. But being able to look at each bar and break each bar down and understand the rhythm, because of course the tab's going to tell us where to play the notes. So it's a skill of developing that rhythmic recognition. So that's really what you're looking at, rhythmic recognition. So quick to hear. There's my tip for you. And I really do mean this. You can't fail at this. You just can't fail. Pick up any reading materials. I'm looking around. What reading materials do I have to hand? Stride piano. I need to be able to look through this, and no matter what I look at, big scary page of music here, I should just be able to look at this and go 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and those rhythms. I don't stress about the rhythms, and it just allows me to put a lot more focus onto the actual pitch that's being read. So I can go back in the drawer. I really do hope that video was useful to you. If it was, let me know in that comment section below, and help a brother out by hitting that subscribe button. Also want to say a huge thank you to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. I could not make these videos if it weren't for these wonderful people. So I genuinely do really appreciate your support. If you want to be like those awesome people and help this channel take it to the next level, allow me to take time off and talk to you on camera for 13 minutes I've been talking for now. It really is a huge help, so do consider supporting the channel like that. You can also head on over to Amazon and check out one of my books. You can see some of them on screen, but of course my latest one is Guided Practice Routines for Guitar. There are elements of this kind of rhythmic recognition reading in Guided Practice Routines for Guitar. Same basic idea is going to appear in a little more detail in the next book, the intermediate level, which is coming out at the end of May, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you so much for all of the support, guys. As I say, always here reading comments, happy to answer your questions, so hit me up in that comment section below. Much love. I hope you have a great day, and as always, go do some practice.